Shana Tova, everyone. As pulpit rabbis, we sometimes feel the need to speak out about important social issues going on in the world on the High Holy Days from a place of Jewish values. And sometimes we feel pressure from members of the congregation to articulate a certain moral message about national or global events. On the High Holy Days, we come to reflect on what we want to create in our lives and in the world in the coming year. My experience is that expressing a position on controversial political issues where you need to just listen as a congregation and not have the space to engage in a discussion to consider other perspectives only results in getting cheers from people who agree with the articulated perspective and alienate people who don't. However, it is appropriate to speak about social issues on the High Holy Days because Rosh Hashanah is known as the birthday of creation, and it's appropriate for us to consider what part we want to play in the ongoing creation of the world. Jewish liturgy invites us to consider that creation is not something that just took place a long time ago, but Cham Kadesh Betuvo B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh V'Reishit. In God's goodness, God is constantly renewing the work of creation every day, and you and I are a part of that. Since we are a part of that divine image and expression, all of our thoughts, choices, and actions are part of this ongoing renewing of creation. When we look around the world at the frustrating and infuriating injustices that pop into our newsfeed each day, many of us wonder how we can make a difference. How can our part in creation help create a more just world? At a local level, there's always opportunities for direct service, whether it's feeding hungry people, serving on a school board, or volunteering for our religious community. These opportunities are direct, immediate, and usually uncomplicated. However, when we look out at the wider world, many of us feel powerless to make effective change. Some of us try to affect change by speaking out or sharing articles on social media, or look to hear from those who have the mic or the stage to make the change we want to see. However, what starts out as the desire to make the world better by sharing thoughts in one-way forums, it usually, again, only results in getting cheers and thumbs up from those who already agree and provokes more division and disrespect from those who don't. When we look around at the world and see the injustice and the pain and the suffering, we would do well to contemplate the root cause of what we see. From my perspective, it's the way that people feel separate from one another. It's the way that we consider some people's dignity and humanity less than others, and then make choices based on that assumption. It's the way that we don't experience the earth as a living being that needs our care and consideration. In some, it's the way that we haven't truly internalized Melo kol haaretz kevodo, that the Holy One of blessing fills all of creation. When we realize that, then Hashem yimloch le'olam va'ed, God will rule over the entire world for humanity. And these are our prayers during this High Holy Day time. Ultimately, if the change that we want and need to see is a continual unfolding of divine consciousness in our human family, then we need to use our voices in ways that affirm our shared humanity and divine image. When we use facts to convince people to view something happening in the world in a certain way, we are not affirming our shared humanity. We are instead saying that there's a moral way to view the situation, and that way is ours. We're so divided as a country right now. Many of us are filled with outrage. We fight about morality and politics at the polls, on social media, and at the dinner table. These fights destroy friendships and threaten our democracy. Although some people are happy to be angry, most of us want less outrage and more understanding. In his book, Outraged, social psychologist Kurt Gray shows through experiments and studies that every fight about morality comes down to one thing: competing perceptions of harm. We get outraged at people when they deny our assumptions about what causes suffering and when they reject our views of victimhood. We get angry when people disagree about who is really harmed in a situation. As we enter into this new year, the primary point that I want us to consider is that it's our division from each other that is actually the prime cause of the suffering in the world, and it's our ability to come together in mutual understanding and empathy that will enable us to live our tradition's vision of a divine creation. And a key to being open to mutual understanding and connection with those we disagree with is the awareness that even though people on the other side can act in ways that seem immoral, the vast majority of people have a basic moral sense, and it's the same no matter who you vote for. We all have the same moral mind, one wired to care about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and society's most vulnerable. No matter what bumper stickers we have on our cars, where we live, or how we're raised, all human morality is driven by the same concern: harm. If you want to know how much someone morally condemns an act, ask them how much they view it as harmful. Once we empathize with other people's perceptions of harm, often by learning about their experiences of suffering, we can understand people on the other side. Now, political divisions over morality are obvious. Liberals and conservatives argue over dozens of issues, including climate change, healthcare, unemployment, immigration, and the idea of systemic racism. This disagreement makes it easy to assume that we must have deep mental differences, that left and right-leaning people rely on different moral mechanisms. But moral disagreements can still arise even if we share a harm-based moral mind, because liberals and conservatives disagree about who is especially vulnerable to victimization, and therefore who most urgently needs protection from harm. People who lean left versus right make different assumptions about vulnerability. And the classic example of this difference of assumptions in vulnerability is fetuses. Conservatives are more likely than liberals to view a fetus as a human baby, which is extremely vulnerable to victimization, at least more vulnerable than the adult women who hold fetuses in their womb. On the other hand, liberals tend to see early-stage fetuses as much less vulnerable to victimization, placing them somewhere between a human baby and maybe a mindless mass of rapidly dividing cells. Even though left-leaning people see fetuses as having some susceptibility to suffering, they perceive mothers as being more vulnerable to victimization. And these different assumptions of vulnerability explain political differences. If fetuses are more vulnerable than mothers, then abortion seems immoral. But if mothers are more vulnerable than fetuses, then abortion seems permissible under certain circumstances. Although we usually agree that all human beings are generally susceptible to harm, political debates put competing narratives about victimhood and suffering against each other. Everyone agrees that both American citizens and undocumented immigrants can be victimized. But if you see illegal immigrants as causing harm to American citizens by taking jobs or increasing crime, then you will be attracted to tighter immigration policies. Or on the other hand, if you focus on the vulnerability of undocumented immigrants, emphasizes the heightened suffering of people detained at the border, fleeing violence from their homeland, or being separated from loved ones after living in the country for many years, you might find looser immigration policies more appealing. And of course, there is so much more nuance to debates about immigration or abortion or taxation or many other issues that don't fall into these black and white binaries that I've put over. But perceptions around harm and vulnerability can explain arguments about morality and politics. Now, the Torah's name for Rosh Hashanah is Yom Teruah, the day of the shofar call. And there's nothing in the Torah about this day being the Jewish New Year. It takes place on the 7th month of the biblical year, actually beginning during the month of Passover. If the nature of this day is all about the shofar call, the rabbis ask, well, what is the shofar supposed to sound like? And they teach that it should sound like the sobbing of Sisera's mother. In the book of Judges, Sisera is the sworn enemy of the Jewish people who tries to destroy them but fails. His mother is looking out the window, expecting that he will come home victorious with all the spoils of war. But when she learns that he's no more, she breaks down crying. It's an amazing thing. The shofar is supposed to sound like the grief of our enemy. The shofar calls upon us to have compassion, to not get so locked into our side or our perspective that we close our hearts to the humanity of the other. We are asked to recognize the vulnerability of those who are different from us and even those who oppose us. This is a difficult thing. Over and over, the Torah tells us to circumcise our hearts, to heed the sound of the shofar call and open to the vulnerability of the other. In our quest to humanize each other across divides, we need to realize that telling stories, not facts, can be the best way to share with others the complexity of our own journeys or why we see the things that we do. We can all relate to characters in books or movies who are motivated to avoid harm and suffering for themselves or their loved ones. In his book, The Art of Character, Creating Memorable Characters for Fiction, Film, and TV, David Corbett outlines several guidelines for creating compelling characters, and among the most important is vulnerability, the struggle against some source of suffering, whether physical, situational, or moral. Corbett writes, when people appear wounded or in need of our help, we're instantly drawn to them. It's a basic human reaction. Vulnerability creates a kind of undertow, pulling us towards a character who is wounded or imperfect, and that attractive force is far more important than whether that character is likable. Think about compelling movies or TV that shows a villain who's the bad guy, but shows their vulnerability, their humanity, and how juicy that show is. While seeing fictional characters as full human beings is a worthy goal for writers, it's also a goal for bridging divides. There's an organization called Narrative 4, whose goal is to help people see the humanity of the other side, even across unimaginable differences. And they do this through story exchanges, where two partners tell each other a story, and then they have to switch, retelling their partner's story. The crucial part is that you have to retell the other person's story in the first person, infusing it with your own feelings and impressions to make the experience your own. In the most difficult test of story exchanges, Narrative 4 paired two people with completely opposite stances on guns. Todd Underwood is a staunch advocate of gun rights. He collects guns, and he's the founder of the United Gun Group, a firearms e-commerce website where George Zimmerman sold the gun that killed Trayvon Martin. Underwood claims to own an arsenal of guns, and prior to the interview described the movement to restrict access to guns as a lot of misinformation by people who are completely uneducated, making an emotional decision and trying to justify it intellectually. Todd's conversation partner was Carolyn Tuft, who was shot in a mass shooting in a mall in Salt Lake City. Her 15-year-old daughter was shot too. Although Tuft survived with lead poisoning from the 3-bullet shot point blank into her lower back, her daughter died. Now, Carolyn is an activist for gun control, saying that even if I would have had a gun in every pocket, there's not one thing I could have done. Now, while the entire exchange is worth watching, and you can on the Narrative 4 website, its most emotional moment is when Underwood retells Tuft's experience of losing her daughter. He speaks about the pain of losing Tuft's daughter as if she were her own, and how the loss still haunts him today, how it robbed him of who he used to be. And by the end of his first-person retelling of Tuft's story, Underwood is sobbing. Tuft reaches out to Underwood and touches his hand, a compelling moment of humanness across moral differences. It wasn't just Underwood who understood Tuft. She also came to appreciate his capacity for vulnerability and rationality, because his story was also grounded in harm. He ran his gun sales website to support himself and his family because of a disability that makes it difficult to work outside his home. If instead of sharing and retelling stories, Tuft and Underwood had launched a set of facts at each other, moral understanding would have been much more elusive. Even though the facts might be objective, shoving statistics at each other fails to dispel the aura of irrationality and the lack of vulnerability that surrounds political opponents. The power of harm-based stories and the weakness of facts in moral conversation doesn't mean that facts are unimportant. Facts are essential for every aspect of life, especially in determining the best policies for society. But the research findings of Dr. Gray and his team show that facts are best presented only after building some initial respect with a person on the other side, and that respect is easiest to build with harm-based storytelling. Now, there's some basic rules for using stories to bridging divides. The first rule of telling and listening to stories is to strive for understanding, not persuasion. Studies have shown that presenting stories primarily to persuade can backfire because people can easily see when others are on the offensive and then they quickly become defensive. Instead of trying to change someone's opinion, we can make it clear that our aim for the conversation is to understand each other. The second rule of stories is that they should not be confused with facts. Facts are objective pieces of information without a point of view. Stories have a point of view. They happen to someone in particular. When we tell a story, we can emphasize that it's an experience from our perspective and that it could help someone understand that perspective. The third rule of stories is that we must listen to other people's stories. Too often in conversation, we focus only on our own irritation while the other person is talking. Instead of engaging with their thoughts and beliefs, we simply rehearse what we will say to counteract their points. When we hear another person's story and how that animates their perspective on a certain issue, it's important to validate their experience. We don't have to agree with their perspective, but we can affirm how their experience shapes their perspective. We can also relate to their desire to avoid harm and share what we do have in common. Only after that validation takes place do we take time to share our experience and perspective. As a human family and as a Jewish community, we will continue to work towards the healing and repair of our broken world in ways that make sense to us. But if we separate from one another because we haven't taken the time to understand each other's love and care, then we are contributing to the brokenness. Our division from each other is actually the prime cause of our suffering in the world, and it's our ability to come together in mutual understanding and empathy that enables us to live our tradition's vision of a divine creation. Well, this is my last High Holy Days with Temple Bethel of South Orange County. I will continue to cherish my relationships with each of you. The conversations that we will continue to have and the mutual understanding that we will grow into together is, in my view, the deepest Torah and the foundation for any healing that we can bring to this world. Shana Tova.